I'm very excited to welcome our new sponsor, Higher Nature, who have created Rekindle, which I'm currently trying out and is working a treat, a 100% natural libido-enhancing supplement for women, which contains clinically backed ingredients to give your sex life a boost. And who doesn't want that? Hi, I'm Suzanne, and you're listening to Sex Advice for Seniors. And today I'm with a guy. Actually, we recorded, I think it was about 6 months ago now. And unfortunately, the recording got corrupted, and I tried to fix it. He tried to fix it. We couldn't fix it. So we have come back. And you know what? It's going to be a new discussion. So I'm with Christopher Hans. He's in some very exotic part of the world with a lovely white, light looking shirt on. And I'm in a sweatshirt and a scarf. So we can talk about that at some point. But Chris is a sexologist. He's a shamanic worker. And yeah, I remember the last time we spoke, it was in relation to more to kind of men's groups, how you were working with men, and which was really interesting. But anyway, welcome to the show.
Thank you. My pleasure, Suzanne, for you to have me here. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we got there eventually. Yeah, I remember one of the interesting aspects of our conversation was we were talking about men and the men that you work with in your groups. Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Well, it's been actually 2 men's groups, of which it started, I think, quite positively. We were aged, I'd say, between early 20s to 40s, and myself being the oldest member. I had a writer who wrote a book on how so many women came from their whole backgrounds to live in Portugal, and how about 20 women and about 20 men. I think it's called Women Who Walk or Men Who Walk. And she included me in that book as, in terms of men's groups and that sort of help. So I just thought, I'll explore this a bit further. So we got a group going, and it sort of fizzled out because what happened is, we did all these exercises. Originally, we went to people's houses. We showed up. We went for walks. All sounded very positive. And then after, with the pandemic, people became more isolated, and it started going into very sort of automaton kind of stuff where it would be pickup artistry, how to meet women using pickup artistry. And I said, where's the organic side of this? And it really then it got into, a lot of criticism of the way men and women are relating, all these thick YouTube videos. And I said, look, I find this so negative. I've tried to, be a mentor also, albeit older, but, can we change the theme? And I think people just fizzled out. And then another group appeared, and the group was called Polarities in Portuguese, mostly Portuguese members, a few English, but again, I was the oldest. And again, it was very negative. So my whole take home on this is that there's the attitude between men and women and dating and this negativity is a preeminent thing these days. Plus I have a lot of friends who are doing online dating and all this. I haven't done for a long time. I was actually counseling for dating sites and stuff a long time ago. That was when you'd write your stuff, not just swipe left or right, but I also understand the importance of how you look and how that's the first kind of gut instinct. So I kind of let it all settle, and I'm now more open to what people have to say. Not necessarily I'm going to join the group or agree, but that's kind of my take home. But it has been a little bit, I'd say, negative. In that.
Is it still going, these groups, or one of
these groups are going, but I am not taking part because it just became so negative. How we need a toxic masculine, toxic. It's all about toxic masculine, feminine.
Yeah.
All the messages you hear thousands of times over on YouTube and all these different platforms.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, I was having a conversation with one of my kids on the weekend, actually, who plays football. And we were talking about this just in relation to some of the stuff that I'm doing. And he was saying that even just the boys that that he comes across playing football and in other places, the way they talk about women is just generally so crude and derogatory. And
Yeah,
these are young men in their early 30s, right?
right.
So it's just pervasive. This whole way of speaking about women seems to be pervasive. And when I hear people like yourself going, I had to step away from these groups because I just couldn't work with these people, I find that incredibly disheartening,
Yeah,
because what's the solution here? We know that that the Andrew Tates, the YouTube videos, this toxic masculinity, it's creating these chasms in how men and women relate, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better,
no.
sadly.
Yeah, I think society it's sort of that almost physics reality of when you go from one extreme. I won't say the Me Too. I mean, I would say the Me Too movement. I would even say, my mentor, but coach, mentor in sexology, also is very disheartened by that whole movement and how it went from one extreme, and I think the pendulum's swung back to another extreme, and hopefully, we'll go back to the middle. It's robotic these days. I mean, with all the, pornography sites and things that are available and plus the pandemic kept us online and on media, but not, seeing each other in person, that changes theories about, how our bodies, it rewires our whole brain and how we actually see things these days, causing great anxiety. So that's a whole other theory, one theory, we call it, it's based on the flight, fight, freeze thing. More people are freezing now. More people are, anxious. They don't know how to react. And so they kind of just withdraw or, go to alternatives, on screen instead of live, right?
Yeah, I mean, we know that these problems are, we hear a lot about toxic masculinity, but I suspect a lot of that seems to be aimed at younger men
Yeah.
and and men who are trying to find a partner and struggling to do that. How do you see that applying to people of our own age?
Good question. Whew, that's a good question indeed. I do meet people of my age and older, but I think, I mean, either they're in a relationship or they're a lot of them alone. They go out with other men of their groups. They go out, whether it's walks or activities. But the sexual side of it, the sexuality, healthy sexuality side, I really don't hear much about it. I think people have kind of withdrawn, certainly in the world that I've experienced. I would say in Europe, Portugal, some traveling in South American countries, I think a little bit different. But I would say, yeah, it's not a subject that comes up much. Even if I say I'm a sex coach, it's kind of hush hush.
So, bearing in mind that we're talking about places outside the UK, do you
Right.
how much of what you see is cultural versus just what you see more generally amongst, especially amongst older people? Do you think, because we always think that Mediterranean countries, maybe people are more physical, maybe people are more sexual, it's sunnier,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
people,
it's a good point. It's a good point. And
where,
what I've seen is I've seen that there was this. My take on it, from observing, is that it was that way that you could go to countries and it's like that spell of the may maybe come from the US you know hadn't reached some of these countries, but I think it has now because media is so available everywhere. People send their little messages on. It's everywhere. All these messages, like I've seen that message or I've seen that film 100 times old. And that's everywhere. So I would say certainly in South America, there is a more traditional approach, which is actually more heartening.
yeah.
More of an idea of family, slightly more traditional. And it's these men's groups that I've seen it. Even though they're very angry, they do want. When I speak to them, sometimes in meetup groups and internations events that I go to, sometimes they do say they want a more traditional connection with women. Not necessarily they have to stay at home, but it's just gone crazy now. No one's winning. And the kids are suffering, and they're just not getting exposure to quality time and time outside. It's usually in a gym, quick, go back to the house, online, end of the day, kind of take it, same again next day.
Yeah, because when I live in the Gran Canaries during the winter,
Uh-huh.
and when I go to little local places, I have to say, although it's very, very traditional, I do find it incredibly encouraging that there is still a big culture around dance in a lot of these countries. So there's a lot of activities that are just involved with people, couples dancing. And in
Yes.
Spain, especially, and Latin America for that matter, you see loads of really quite, old people
Yeah.
in their 70s, even in their 80s and beyond, still grabbing each other's hands, still
Yeah.
dancing with each other in these local places where people are playing local music and women are dancing with women. And, like it's really quite charming. And a friend of mine that lives out in the Gran Canaries as well, she loves dancing, and there's always activities. And I think, one of the things that I do like about those places is that sort of couples dancing, which my parents used to do when they were younger, it's still got, it's still very present in the society. Whereas we've lost all of that ability to just turn up at a place and the music comes on and walk across the room to somebody and grab their hand and ask if they'd like to have a dance with us. Like that just doesn't go on in the UK for
Yeah.
the most part.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
do think that it does. What I love about it is it doesn't always have to lead to sex, but it is about creating a physical connection.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
I do think
That's it.
there's something to be said for that. And I certainly see older people that are still doing couples dancing, that are still out there, and I do respect that and feel that that's something that's been lost in the British culture, that means that people do, there's less things like that for people to do. So, but I take on board your point that it's it's challenging because on the one hand, you've got this kind of quite traditional view of male and female roles you see within these cultures and older people where the wife stays at home and she does the cooking and the nana sort of
Yeah.
trope and all of that sort of thing. And then on the flip side, you've got young women who are ambitious, career focused, career orientated, and young men, I think, in struggle with
Yeah.
reconciling this
Exactly.
what
Yeah.
they're used to and
Exactly.
what they suddenly are now having to work through, you know.
No, absolutely. I take to heart what you said, and when you said it, I do reflect actually on my trip to Gran Canaria, where I was actually meeting older folks. They were actually Indian background who'd been on the island like 40 or 50 years, with which I did business years ago. Hadn't seen them for 20 years, and they were so open. We went out to lunch. The daughters were present, the grandchildren, and they said, "Come anytime with your family." They said, "Go to Praia Canteras, on in Gran."
Yeah.
And you have old folks, meeting every day in the same place. I thought refreshing, so I'm going to go. I was very heartened by it. I was very, kind of moved by that experience. So I left thinking, yeah, I definitely want to go back. And I think you can, find these places, but you have to create your own bubble of
Yeah.
friends. In that group, you have to go to that box. So, you go to that particular angle where you meet a certain group that is in this on the same wavelength, right? So I'm
Yeah.
sure it's out there. It's just sometimes you just have to, go online or meet. It's just a different way of. You've got to kind of find it in a different way. So often it starts online through whether it's internations, meetup groups, and that sort of thing. So, but
Yeah. I mean, the point though is that what on the one hand you've got these quite traditional activities that go on, and on the other hand you've got things like men's groups and self-development workshops and all these sorts of things. And these two groups of people don't seem to engage with one another. You know, the
Yeah.
people that go to these kind of self-development orientated things and maybe are spouting out misogynist nonsense are
Yeah.
not the same group that are going and just grabbing some lovely lady's
Yeah.
hand, going out dancing with them, right? So
Exactly.
there's a there's a disconnect between all of these different groups who could probably, well, one could definitely learn from the other. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, if you're struggling to figure out how to engage with women, one of the best ways to do that is to go where women are,
Yeah.
like dance groups, for instance,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and
Yeah. Dance. Yeah. Good
and
connection.
and do something that creates a body heart
Exactly.
connection, right?
Yeah, you
Um,
actually mentioned something also that was it, which was shut down. But Biodanza. You probably know Biodanza,
oh
the
no, I
group.
don't know that.
Biodanza was a guy that was started by a guy I think from also South America, and there were groups all over the world, and there are hundreds in Portugal. There were, you could go and you go and you pay $5 the first time. You decide if that group's for you. It could be 40 people, could be 10, 15, and it was quite good because you get to connect. And you start, it's actually a very organic way where there could be people who are more on the computer, they don't know how to connect. So they're just
Yeah.
sort of looking at each other. And then there's a whole method by which you slowly, during that meeting, unwind. And by the end,
Oh,
you might be dancing with another guy. Two women might be dancing together, but you're feeling this. It's a whole theory and way of life, of which I know people who are, in professions which they found stressful, and they became biodanza trainers. I started myself to do the training program, but it was 3 years, and I felt I wasn't going to. And again, the pandemic happened; it kind of shut it down. But biodanza, Biodanza, and that's a very good. It still exists, obviously, because there's thousands of groups, and there's international meetings. Not
well,
just that people can have. So I should look it up and see what's going on in that department. But that's one
yeah.
way, for people to certainly connect.
Oh, I've never heard of that. Is it a bit like Five Rhythms?
Exactly this sort of thing. Exactly, five rhythms. Yeah, exactly. Which
Yeah.
I did in London. Also, you probably have done the same, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I have friends that are really into Five Rhythms. For people who don't know what Five Rhythms are, it is exactly as it sounds. It's a series of dances that are just free dancing, where it starts out in one rhythm and then it builds into different rhythms until the rhythms become quite frenetic and the
right.
dancing becomes quite frenetic, but it starts out quite slow and it can be quite sexy. It can be
Yes.
quite amusing. It's quite liberating to
Yeah.
just be, there's no specific pattern and you're just letting your body go and doing things that
Yes.
whatever
Yes.
it wants to do, whatever your body wants to do at that moment.
Yeah, and I remember now when I did a training for therapists in Poland for the sexology, university. They were called SARS, sexual attitude, readjustment kind of thing. It was the therapist we met in a out in Polish countryside, and there was a lady. I think originally English, and she actually was integrated into that whole session with us, which is about contact, connection for us because we'd always been with clients. It's like it's our week, right? And we use
Yeah.
Biodanza throughout the week, and at the end of the week, when we were kind of all open and everything hanging out by that time, people were literally cradling someone else in their arms. I mean, it got to
Amazing.
that point where vulnerability was really the outcome, which was fantastic. I really found it was really well incorporated into that week. So it has all of these other sides, the whole philosophy, way of life. People like literally, it's like their family. This.
Yeah.
And so we're using these vehicles, to try to find connection, contact, dance, biodanza, five rhythms. But yeah, it usually means going into some sort of, group. I think, Suzanne, it's worth mentioning. Obviously, people, you go into these groups, and at the beginning it can be difficult because what can you say these days which is not seen as sexist, or, you might say I was joking, but I think it's that idea you've got to feel safe first before you can, express yourself. And I think that's the big problem. I mean, my mum was laughing. I remember before she passed on a few years ago, she was laughing. She said, she showed me an article in the New York Times, and it was about, how men could not even put their arm around a woman. They would like float around the shoulder. And it was like, what can you do? Can I give you a hug? Clients, you ask, can handshake or hug? And it's got to that point where it's not become natural.
Yeah.
And it's really, unfortunate, but, so it's good to, connection, body connection, because we're all floating with too much stimulation above the head,
Yeah.
above the body.
And I think that's kind of what it all comes down to, isn't it? I was reading a guy that on Substack who was talking about one of his dates, and he was saying that during the date he felt this very strong physical connection, but he was also aware that it might be highly appropriate to just lean in and give this woman a kiss,
Right.
even though he really felt compelled to give her a kiss. And he decided that he was going to go for it with the view that he might get slapped in the face or something might happen. And so he went for it, and she responded. And then afterwards, after they stopped kissing, she went, "Oh, well, that was a surprise." And, but not in a,
Yeah.
in a kind of lighthearted way, right?
Lighthearted. Well, that's nice that they're
And
both
then
connected. Yeah.
and then the other, they ended up going back together and stuff. But I said to him that when I was more actively dating and younger, one of my things that I used to say when I got to that place was I didn't wait for men to say it. I would just say, "I really must kiss you now." And
Oh,
then
wow. You're a rare breed. We need more of you. We
I
need more of
was
you.
just, and I would just say, "I really must kiss you now." And normally they would be like, "Oh, good. Okay. I would like to do that as well." So that was
That would
like,
be
no,
very refreshing to have women, to
you know, but,
wanting to say that. Well, that's also that's great. Wow, that's I'm glad you shared that.
but, he said he felt very vulnerable in that moment,
Yeah,
recognizing that this situation could go badly wrong. And I do think you're right. The pendulum is swung the other way. On the flip side of that, I think what things like Biodanza, Five Rhythms, other dance and group, activities where people can have the opportunity to connect. And Five Rhythms, you don't have to necessarily touch each other. In fact, generally you don't. You just
you
kind of
don't. Right.
dancing in the same space, and you're just kind of aware of each other's energies and what's going on. And sometimes you might, get close to them, but it's very rarely that you connect, but
Yeah,
it
yeah,
actually touch the other person. But there is definitely something around, I suspect, the men's groups that you go to, this feeling of being incredibly disconnected, quite lonely, quite angry. And part of that must be just this complete lack of physical connection that
I
that
think so.
they that they've reached at this point in their life where they're just not able to break through into a situation where there's any kind of contact.
Right.
And then and sex now has become so transactional in so many ways that it then feels artificial. It just doesn't feel like there's a natural kind of flow towards that. So again, it just seems to me that there's some of this anger isn't some of this anger is just because for me, I just think they just don't know what to do. They just don't
Exactly.
know
Yeah.
what to do. They feel stuck.
Well, yeah. There's the theory I was trying to remember was it's called polyvagal theory, and do you know that? Have you heard of that?
No, no.
It's if I've got it right, it's basically people, the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic side is flight fight, and the
Yeah.
parasympathetic is freeze. And now what I'm hearing is more people are freezing than ever. They, as you say, they don't know what to do, so they're just frozen. And in the theory, to complete that cycle, which is healthy, it's necessary to socialize after freezing. So you have to have the touch or the people around you. Exactly the opposite is what happened during the pandemic. So we needed the touch, but we got like, get away, you might have,
Yeah,
COVID or
yeah,
whatever it is. So that you can see there's all these disgruntled and frustrated, anxious people, and it's very, very easy. You can see, and they don't know what's wrong. They might have a panic attack. I have young people who are having panic attacks. What's their first line is like, I don't know what to do. Pornography or something,
yeah,
a theory of, pickup, which because ABC, right? It's like men, obviously, like I won't
yeah,
be
yeah,
sexist, but often it's like how to fix this, and they go to
yeah,
some sort of technique which is advertised, which is it's unfortunate, but there is definitely a fallout from all of this and having to be on media, and then of course it's not only media. I remember a few years ago, older folks were not on the media so much, but now I see that it's almost everybody on media. You count people at the table waiting for a ferry or something, and it was like you would be more younger or up to. But now I
yeah,
see it's almost everyone. So it's like I think the pandemic had that effect that it forced everybody to be on the media, and that has obviously a consequence. And so
yeah.
what's the way forward?
Yeah, I mean, what I hear from older men more is I older women don't want to be sexual anymore. That's what I hear a lot.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
older women just don't want to be sexual, or in the same vein as you're talking about with young men, I hear, well, who wants to be with an old woman, an old dried up woman anyway, right? So
Not
I
necessarily
hear
dried
that.
up.
Well, yeah, but that's, this is
The
kind of,
perception.
again, this perception. So I hear
Yeah.
that.
Right.
I hear again with older men as well, just this kind of frustration and anger, this desperate need to connect and to be with somebody. And I
Yeah.
hear on the flip side from women, I'm really happy on my own. I've got lots of friends. I'm doing okay. I've given up on sex. I'm not all that interested anyway.
Mhm.
Um, so, those old guys are boring and they just want, what is it? A purse or a nurse? That's what that's
I
what
see. Personal nurse. I got it. Yeah.
okay.
Interesting. Like in Portugal, I was saying during the last few years when I'd say interviewed or, met people and I've asked, what are your needs as an older woman, maybe 65, I'd say 60,
Yeah.
65 or older. And usually the reply was fairly similar. And it was, I have my own space. I don't want to share that necessarily with a living, I've done my marriage, I had the
Yeah.
kids, but I want my space. But I would like a man, to come once a week. We'd have dinner, we'd have sex, and that's it. And that's enough, And so that seemed to be the pervasive message. Is that something you sort of have found or?
Well, that's the situation I have, right? So
Right. Okay.
I've got that situation,
Okay.
and I wrote about that recently on
Okay.
my just as a little funny note, because me and this person I have that situation with have been doing this for a year now, just
Oh,
over a year, and it's just perfect for both of us. I think
yeah. Yeah.
he certainly doesn't complain, and nor do I, and I had 700. I'm still getting them. I've had 700 likes to this post. I've had like all these people reposting it and going, how can I find this? This is my ideal
Oh,
situation. But interestingly enough, from both sexes, not
from both.
just
Yeah. Yeah. That
from
it
both.
works. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the thing
That's it.
that was pointed out by a few people were, once you free yourself from this societal, um, constraint of relationships looking a certain way,
Yes, exactly.
certain
Yeah.
modality and everything, and you just go, actually, let's just like rewrite the rule book. It doesn't have
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
look like that. Then both people can get what they want as long as they know what they want.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Freeing them from even the idea that there has to be coupled them, because there's all sorts of people
yeah,
swinging in different directions. Yeah. But I would say England, UK, certainly London, when I was there, that was like maybe 15, when I was living there 15 years ago, it seemed to be, and this was surprising to me, that in London, folks would live in their own places and then they would date, but they're rarely, the people I was meeting online, going to the pub, whatever,
yeah,
it would seem to be the reality. So the whole thing of shacking up, which happens a lot in, South American countries, whatever, for whatever financial reasons, for whatever. I think people are more comfortable, maybe. Well, that was, again, I guess you can draw the line in post-pandemic and pre-pandemic. But I think that whole thing of being in too quickly or too much, creates a lot of anxiety, which we already have. So that would
Yeah.
be a reply. Yeah, just limit it to, time that you can be, more comfortable with, So
Yeah.
why not? Seems,
Yeah. And I think, you know, uh, going back to sort of prescribed ways of being, and perhaps some of the men in the men's group are still thinking in those old ways
yeah.
of like, well, why, this is what I want. I mean, I did encounter that in some relationships I've had where I was very clear about the fact I like seeing people on weekends. I'm not interested in living with people. And, I found, especially with men my own age and older, that wasn't actually completely what they wanted.
Okay. Yeah.
I found with slightly younger men that, no, and I'm not talking like massively younger. I'm just talking about
Yeah.
guys in their 50s, they seem to be quite happy in this thing. So I think as we age and as we start thinking about perhaps having some mobility issues, needing
Yeah.
some support around our health conditions, whatever it happens to be, we start thinking to ourselves, who's going to look after me? What's
Exactly.
going to
Yeah.
happen to me,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of these
Yeah.
men are looking around, as the women said, for a purse or a nurse, and
yeah.
mainly it seems to be a nurse. So,
Yeah.
and and
Right.
most of the women I know are still very active, quite fit, and being a nurse just is not of interest to
No,
them.
no, no, no. I think it works. I mean, I guess it works both ways. I remember this article. It was funny because I had read it and I met a woman. She said, I read that article too. I was on like British Airways at the time. It was about, how, women preferred, after a certain age, they like their space, their nest. And the man is now a guest, once a week or whatever. But if there was a health issue with her, I mean, what if she falls down on the deck? No one finds her because no one, I
Yeah,
mean,
and
then what happens? So, obviously, yeah, I mean, it works both ways, right? But
yeah,
how to address that? But it seems like with all the likes you have, that whole thing of once a week a visit or a weekend, why not? Um,
yeah,
remember that
yeah,
film, Same Time Next Year?
yeah,
You
yeah.
That was a great film. I mean, that's just once a year, but I mean, if you can go to that extreme, right, you can anything. I suppose is possible.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people do, once they open their minds to the possibility that things don't have to look a certain way,
Yeah,
both,
yeah,
both sexes may find that actually there's a lot more people out there who would be
right.
quite keen to engage in whatever I call it, a situationship,
Yeah,
in whatever that situationship looks like. And it's about, for me, that's one of the benefits of being older, is just going,
right,
fuck the rule book. Like I've got kids, I've been married, I've done all
right,
that.
right,
Like,
right.
let's just rethink what I actually want, which is
Yeah,
not, not,
exactly. Good point. And I would say for them on the men's side, often there's a negative there because a man obviously sometimes just wants to fix. They want a solution. They want to fix something or try to fix the person. So it's like, no, let that go and just say, what are your needs? They might meet with someone else's rather than, oh, these are all the expectations that we have, being very gung ho about that. And so, what you say, if that could be reflected in some, you know, uh, speech or the way they write the profile or whatever, a few lines, I'm sure that
yeah,
would open up more possibilities.
yeah, totally. I mean, it's funny. One of the guys on my post said, we often say that it's women that are always creating the drama in relationships,
Hmm.
but it's not necessary, and it's not necessarily true.
Takes two
It's
to
just
tango. Huh?
how we're thinking. Like you said, it's like, oh, but I need to fit in with, I need
Right.
to fit in with her and what she wants. Or, oh, I've always I have a lot of guys that said, oh, my last relationship, she was nuts, or she was crazy, or she was full of drama. To
Yeah.
me, that's a
Yeah.
bit of a red flag, because I just think, well, normally
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
tell you, in my situationship, because I don't live in this person's pocket, I know what his issues are. Like, I
Yeah.
and And I'm okay with that. It's like, look, I get the fact that some of this stuff, it doesn't have long term,
No.
it's not ideal. But in this situationship, it's fine.
Yeah.
It doesn't impact on me.
Yeah, it's got to be lighter. Yeah, I would say through my certainly, I can only say my own experience or people or clients is that um, there's actually a great book, I think, David Risho, and I think it's called How to Be an Adult in a Relationship. The other one's called When the Past is the Present. So when that stuff of the marriage and the traumas, which are there,
Mm,
they're covered up because we want to date, we want to look good, but eventually they usually come up. And it could
yeah,
be an emotional reaction, and it's like anxiety on both sides, split. Instead of, okay, this is what happened. Uh, you're okay, you're safe to, not vomit on me, but, express a little bit of what happened, which was
yeah,
difficult for me, and slowly get to know someone. But for me, it's usually been 3 years. It's taken 3 years of any relationship. I mean, and then if you just meet someone temporarily, it could take longer. But for that trust to be able to say, I can express things that I couldn't safely do in a previous relationship for
yeah,
whatever
yeah.
reason. There was like the 3 year thing. So I sort of stick to my guns on that it's like a 3 year process to really get to know someone and feel sort of more safe that you can actually, without having a violent consequence to something that was said, like,
Yeah, I
which would
totally
take
agree with
time,
people who say, "Oh, I knew immediately when I met them it was right." I'm like, "Oh, that's such bullshit." I mean,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah,
it takes years to get to know someone, to understand all their little like
right. Yeah,
weirdness and all the
yeah,
shit that goes on underneath the
for
surface, and
sure.
for them to stop being their perfect self, really. Um,
Yeah, and then to relearn, right? Instead of the reaction happening, it's
yeah.
like, hey, I was waiting for drama there. It didn't happen. Is something wrong? you
Exactly, I don't do
um,
drama anymore. Anyway, it's been lovely to chat to you,
Likewise,
and
my pleasure.
don't shut down
I will.
until the recording's uploaded.
So what happens now? So it ends, and then the recording, nothing will. Something will
That's
come.
it. I'm gonna stop this. I'm gonna
Okay,
say goodbye. You're not gonna go anywhere yet.
I'm not going to go anywhere. But a pleasure, and hope to meet maybe in Gran Canaria or something.
Oh, that would be nice. I'd
Or
love that.
London, but not when it's freezing.
No.
Who knows?